Hard Reuben. Oh my God.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Hard Reuben's Force-Fed Cafe, episode number 7. This episode I'm joined by Jesse Matthewson from Winnipeg, Manitoba's noise metal juggernauts, Ken Mode. Now I love me my heavy metal, but I'm particularly proud of those Canadian metal bands who have somehow, some way, managed to slip through to garner a name and recognition for themselves as a solid and impressive act, almost in spite of their Canadianness. I say almost in spite of their Canadianness because for whatever reason, Canadian music fans are often reluctant to embrace our own unless they have somehow proven themselves on the world stage. And in that, Ken Mode are no slouch. But nationally, it's an unfortunate fact. It's like we are the anti-Sweden when it comes to national recognition and support of heavy music. But that could be a discussion for another day. Ken Mode has proven to be an exception to all of that. They are an unrelenting workhorse who have toured nearly endlessly and have been rewarded with a respectable reputation and discography. Their blistering work ethic and dedication to their craft has resulted in numerous Juno nominations in the category of heavy metal and hard rock, but also a victory. Wins for a band that has largely done it themselves and done it their way for nearly 20 years. I want to say thank you again to Jesse for joining me here today. I hope you all enjoy our chat. Let's get this started. Let's talk a little bit about Ken Mode. So you were nominated this year for the Juno. This is your third time, I believe?
Fourth time.
Fourth time.
75% losses.
Well, come on. Your first one was a win.
Yeah, we set the bar entirely too high with that one. So, and we understand. Like, it doesn't even really... I don't know, with a weird award like that, playing metal and expecting awards is fucking stupid anyway, but you kind of feel like they want to spread it around so everyone gets a shot, and I mean, it's cool that we keep getting acknowledged, that we're amongst the most respected, I don't know, whatever, at least making somewhat quality albums by someone's standard. Being acknowledged is cool, even though we now lose every time.
Well, this year wasn't so bad. You lost to Voivod. I mean, if you're going to lose to somebody, it might as well be Voivod.
And I mean, when we won, I was doing press talking about how, like, it's cool that they're finally acknowledging bands in the kind of darker forms of art, and that the fact that Canada has largely ignored Voivod from, like, a mainstream music scene side of things, like I feel that's a crying shame given the global impact they've had. So the fact that they finally got to be acknowledged in such a way is really cool. And their reaction to winning was so genuine that it was kind of adorable, given that they've been a band for like 35 years. It was cool to witness that all.
I just think about that tour they did for the album Nothing Face. I don't know if you ever caught that or if you missed it, but that was for me one of the greatest shows, the greatest tours I'd ever seen. It was Soundgarden and Faith No More opening for Voivod, and it was just it was mind-melting.
I was too young for that back in the day, but I definitely remember hearing about it, and it's funny how both of those two bands became such gigantic megastars after the fact. And who would have thunk that that tour, in retrospect, you talk about that, like, Voivod headlined that.
Yeah, and that was a big tour. I think there were a number of other bands that came in, and I think Prong was one of the bands that stepped in for some of those shows, and there were a lot of bands that jumped in and out of that tour, so that was a big one for them. And
yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. Okay, so you had a good year. I totally hear what you're saying about it being kind of, you can't really be playing the kind of music you're playing and hoping for awards, but it is, I think, pretty amazing in Canada, where I've always kind of viewed the arts to be there's a very highbrow, snobbish attitude towards heavy metal and hard rock. So it's nice to see that establishment has finally woken up to the fact that you guys are working your ass off. Not just you, but there are 4 other bands that were nominated, and every single one of you tours constantly or puts albums out one after the other. It's just non-stop. You're earning that recognition. I
Yeah,
think that's great.
a lot of the Canadian music industry, it is funny the way that kind of gets treated. Even like a lot of what I do for my day job is working within the Canadian industry, working a lot on the grant and admin side, doing accounting and shit like that. But you definitely see the biases that the rest of the industry has toward more commercial and radio-friendly music, yet a lot of the time they simply can't deny a lot of the darker side of things because of how hardworking the bands in those scenes have to be to get recognized, and they end up being more successful and popular than a lot of the more radio-friendly stuff that looks better on paper, but Canada produces a lot of very original content that they pound the pavement harder than anyone else, and I think that's part of why they do so well. And a lot of that has to do with where we're from. Like, it's tough to break out of Canada because we're far from almost everything, right?
For sure. Talking about where you're from Winnipeg.
Yep.
And let's go back a little bit to when you formed the band. That was in, 98, 99 with your brother Shane?
Yeah, 99. I guess we technically started playing with the original members of this band, probably 96, but we started playing as the group Ken Mode. Our first show was in 1999. It's our 20th anniversary this fall.
That's a big one. It's hard to last 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah, evidently. You see that a lot. Most bands probably have a 3 to 5 year max lifespan, and I understand because a lot of people kind of cycle in and out of playing music, and it's tough to manage a project for that long with the nature of the type of people that play music a lot of the time, because it's very emotional, artistic types of folk, and when you put them into circumstances where you're completely sleep deprived and trying to make decisions under those conditions, and a lot of people typically develop problems with drugs and alcohol because of boredom and said sleep deprivity. So it's no wonder that a lot of bands have short expiration dates, but the ones that end up making it work, it's funny how long they can last. Even in something like what we do, where we're not really making much money, but you do it because you have to, because there's something wrong with your brain.
Well, that sort of leads me to, I want to talk about a bunch of that stuff that you just mentioned, Jesse, but one of the things that I try to do with this podcast is sort of dive into the reality that people in heavy metal and even hard rock don't always make a living at it, or if they do, it's sort of sporadic. It comes from this notion that back in the 80s, where I was really first getting into heavy metal, and thrash was huge, and then death metal hit, and I had this notion that all these bands that I listened to, that all these musicians that I was idolizing were somehow living the high life. They were somehow millionaires, just pumping out records. And part of that, of course, was the industry. They generated this impression that these guys and girls were rock gods that were somehow untouchable. And then fast forward, just really, it was only about 5 or 6 years, then I heard that there was somebody that I really liked and really looked up to that's like, well, what do you do when you're not touring? And he's like, well, I get a job.
Yeah.
I realize how much I didn't save or didn't earn on tour, and I go and I get a job. Well, what do? I fix cars.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I think a lot of that, in the birthplace of heavy metal, because it kind of spawned from things like hard rock, and back then, labels invested in bands, and there wasn't as many, so the bands that were touring and being these big rock entities, they actually were living those lifestyles, and because heavy metal kind of came from that world, the image continued where you'd see they were built up like they were larger than life, and there was always that divide between the bands and the fans. And as punk rock started to mix with metal, I think that's when that started to decay, because with punk it's always been poor people playing for poor people, and we're really not making any money, so what the hell makes the person in the audience any different from the person on stage? And a lot of time there was no difference. It's just a matter of one picked up a guitar and learned a couple chords and decided why the fuck not? That's kind of always been the approach we've had with the way we treat this stuff too. It's probably just being raised a little more punk than we should have been. Yeah, it's wild how little money some people can make on tour, and all it takes is a few bad decisions, and you can really destroy your margins completely. That's the business we're in now. It's trying to help bands manage these things so they don't go broke. And even then, it's not a huge pot of money going around. We've upset someone over there.
Yeah, there's some dogs out here. They're part of my background noise. So talking about punk rock and the mix of punk rock and heavy metal, I'm thinking back to when you were first getting into music, and you were sort of developing your sound and the sound that would later become Ken Mode. What were some of the bands that you were listening to that really started to influence that? I know that the Ken Mode website talks a lot about Henry Rollins and Black Flag and their work ethos. But in terms of sound, who did you really sort of draw from? What were your influences?
Well, like the first groups that influenced me to even want to play in the first place was bands like Nirvana and the Melvins. And from reading the autobiography on Nirvana, Come As You Are, I discovered all the bands that they were into back when they were kind of growing up in the scene, and all the bands like Black Flag, Scratch Acid, Big Black, stuff like that was kind of where I first cut my teeth. And then just even through the beginning stages of the internet, like people used to put together these weird sites where they'd like to pay homage to bands that they liked. And I remember there was one site where our ex-bassist Daryl found where it was like a site dedicated to the Cows, Unsane, and Cop Shoot Cop. And it's just like nowadays people don't do shit like that, but it's just funny that like I think at the time we may have liked the Cows, and then you just through this one stupid little site that had a couple pictures, you check out Unsane and Cop Shoot Cop, and now they're two of your favorite bands. And it's just things would spiral like that uncontrollably. Also, there was a record shop in Winnipeg that definitely was pretty integral to some of my development, where I picked up records from like Dazzling Killmen, Today's the Day, Neurosis, Drive Like Jehu, a lot of stuff like that ended up becoming kind of my essence, my roots of where all my music came from. And specifically a band from Winnipeg called Kittens that was extremely important for me. Like seeing them live was why I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to play shows with bands like that.
I had sort of a similar experience, but I was in London, Ontario, and there I was a full-on metalhead, but there was a really intense underground punk scene there, and I just remember seeing some of those bands going, yep, this is what you need to do. Turns out I wasn't very talented, so that didn't last, but it still got me into it, still pulled me in, right? So I totally get that.
And talent really doesn't have that much to do with it.
I'm just remembering you mentioned Unsane, and I just remembered their album covers were just unbelievable. I was into death metal, and the Unsane album covers still I found a little unsettling at the time.
Yeah, well, it was kind of pre all that gore stuff too, and back in the 80s, like when they had their debut record with that guy who got run over by a subway train, like that they're disturbing pictures. And you didn't see stuff like that every day because the internet wasn't around.
Yeah, you had to really dig that stuff up.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your bass players. All of them.
There've been a few.
Let's go through. Has it been a revolving door for you, or has it been one of those things that really it's you and Shane, you're Ken Mode, and you just sort of you borrow people as you need them. I know that that's kind of where our mutual friends Fuck the Facts have found themselves. It's really just the core of Melville and Topon, and they bring people in as they're available and as they can. So is that kind of what Ken Mode has become, or have you just had, you mentioned some problems with drugs and alcohol earlier, or has it just been that Ken Mode's been a victim of those circumstances?
At this point, we've been around so long that it seems like we've had a big bad relationship with our bassist, but we really haven't. Like we've I think had like 3 or 4 like full-time ones that we've worked with at this point, and then people who've filled in as like a patchwork when things went awry, just because we had touring obligations that we needed help on. So that's why it ends up looking like we've been through so many people. When our first bassist, Daryl Laxdal, he initially quit the band back in 2004, and then came back in 2005, and then we kicked him out later that year. We kind of didn't really have a bassist for the next 3 years, and we'd worked with a patchwork of friends filling in so we could play shows, write the odd thing, but we really didn't have anything consistent, and yet we were still making records. Like we did a record, our Mennonite one, with Jameel Russell, who was actually in Kittens as their bassist, but he wasn't in the band because he actually lived in Vancouver at the time. And he's done tours with us, but he's never really been an official member, which makes it seem like we're just kicking people out all the time, but it's really not the case. We had Chad Tremblay, who was basically in the band from like 2008 through 2011, and around 2011 is when we started touring full-time, and he couldn't do that. So we had to work with a patchwork of people until we started working with Andrew LaCour in 2011, and he was in the band for about 3 years and probably played like 400 shows with us in that span. And then since Andrew, we've had Scott Hamilton in the band for the past 5 years. So we don't really consider ourselves like people filling in when we need it sort of deal anymore. But even with Scott being in the band, we've been working with our friend Drew Johnston, who helped us in the mid-2000s when Daryl left. And we've been playing with him and writing songs with him again just because because he lives here and Scott lives in Saskatoon. So we'll get together and write material with Scott. We'll write material with Drew, and we're trying to figure out what kind of balance that we can find with this. In the end, we're just trying to make music with our friends and have fun with this at this point. Like, we don't have delusions that we're ever going to, like, live off of it. We spent 5 years touring full-time just trying to build the band into something that could at least make a little bit of money when we go out. And I think we actually accomplished the goals we set out to. It's been cool getting back on the road with this latest record because it shows that all the hard work we put in for all those years actually got us to the level we were trying to get to. Because you don't really come into this playing the style of music we do with delusions that you're going to be like these big rock stars. That's just insane.
No, you become legends, but you don't become rock stars.
Yeah.
You're currently signed with Season of Mist still, I believe.
Technically, we finished our contract with them with this last record, so we don't know what's going on next.
Oh, so next steps are next steps. You'll kind of figure it out as you go.
We'll find out.
How was your relationship with them?
It's been good. They've kind of treated us as like a teeny band the whole time, which makes sense. But at the same time, we're in a weird spot where we're not like a small developmental band. We're like in the lower middle section of that whole universe. We're definitely far from being one of their bigger bands, but we're consistent enough that it's not a joke. And we're extremely self-sufficient. Like, we fund all our own records. We fund a lot of our own PR just because we've never really fit in anywhere. So we don't really need labels a lot of the time, but it does help a lot in certain areas. Yeah, we have no idea what the next step will be. I guess, well, we do. We have to write some material that we give a shit about.
And you have some tour dates to get through before you do that, or have you already started writing that material?
I mean, we have a couple songs that we need to finish right now that we started writing last year, but I think the plan over the next couple years is to just keep doing smatterings of date with other bands that we think are cool in spots that we want to, and keep writing in between, and just don't make it as much of a chore as we used to, where you have to make a record by this time and you have to get on the road. Like, that's not a necessity for us anymore. So we want to do it. We want to do it when it's fun.
Yeah. So you're not really living by the by the sort of industry standard of record cycle. Okay, we did a record, we did a tour, we did a second tour. Okay, it's time to record another record. You're not really sort of living by that kind of standard. You're just sort of doing what you do when you do it.
Yeah, and we've scaled it back for the sake of, one, like, we have day jobs now that require our attention because we are our own bosses on that front too, which both makes it nice that you can take time off to go on the road a little bit, but at the same time you have all the responsibility on you. So if you take off too much, you're completely fucking yourself. You're not going to get fired, but like, you're left with nothing. That, and like, we work with and are depended on by a bunch of other bands. That in itself is rewarding, but you can't just bail on your clients.
So after you mentioned really working it for 5 years, touring and recording and just working to build the name and to build the sort of the brand of the band, did you find yourself? I talked to Topon recently from Fuck the Facts about this kind of thing, and he said we got to a point we just we burnt out. We just knew we had to take a break, a bit of a hiatus. The band wasn't breaking up, we weren't going anywhere, but we needed we had done all this work and constant touring, festivals, side dates for years and years, and we just knew we needed to sit back and I mean, for him, it was the birth of his child that made it all sort of like, okay, well, this is a good time.
Yeah.
Did you guys get to that point where you're like, okay, we need to look at day jobs. We need to look at what else we're going to do. And
yeah, 100%. Well, and like the meaning of the music had always been for the fun of it, and we'd found ourselves in a place where it wasn't fun. Touring wasn't fun. Playing wasn't fun. I still, to a degree, am dealing with a little of that because we only took a couple years off from really doing touring and treating it seriously. And even the last tours we did, I don't know if I really enjoy playing shows the way I used to. And I don't know whether that will ever come back. There's a certain degree of stress that it feels like a job still, but there are a lot of other things around it that like I can't do without. Like, I love writing and making records. That will never. I hope it'll never stop being fun. But the act of touring, it definitely, the older you get, it wears on you. Being uncomfortable all the time, you can deal with as like a 20 and 30-year-old, but the more that moves on, it starts to feel brutal. I need sleep. I like sleep a lot.
You don't get a lot of that when you're driving all the time, do you?
No. So you're just stuck uncomfortable all the time when you're on tour, too, which is part of the most brutal aspect, I think.
That's the job, isn't it? That's the part. Hurry up and wait.
Evidently, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what you did when you took well, I don't know if you call it a hiatus or if you were just like, we're taking a break. We're taking we're not doing anything for a couple of years. I don't know what you called it, but in my brain, it seems like a hiatus. So what did you do during that time?
My brother and I started a company because we needed jobs and we didn't really know what we wanted to do. So we figured we'd try to apply our schooling to the music industry that we've been a part of for the past 15, almost approaching 20 years at that point, and seeing if we could make something of it. And it ended up working out pretty well pretty quickly, which has been really cool. We do a lot of, basically we're the boring side of the music industry, where bands have managers that are cool guys that have cool connections, and then they have business managers that are nerds that make sure things don't fall off the rails. And we do that. We always kind of got punished within the music industry for inherently not being cool, and now we've been able to turn that into something that makes us money.
I think some folks, including myself, would argue that Ken Mode's pretty cool.
Sir, might not be cool.
well, I look in the mirror every day. I know what I'm putting out there. So, I'm not uncool. I'm just not that cool. But I've only had the pleasure of seeing you guys play once, and that was in Victoria, BC, at I think it was Logan's. And I think that was the first year you won your Juno. You and Fuck the Facts had both been nominated, and of course I go way back with Topon, so I was super excited about that. And
Okay.
I thought it was pretty cool that I was excited because I was excited for Topon, and then when I was talking to him about it, he was like, yeah, so what? I'm excited about Ken Mode. and then you won, and he was just like, I'm like thinking, you were nominated too. But
yeah,
he was like,
had,
who cares? Those guys won.
It was too bad. I think they've been working on a record, and originally I think it was targeted to come out last year around the same time as ours was, and then I believe him and Mel had another kid, which I think pushed everything back. But we'd, even though we had one record in between, but we'd been competing with them at the two Junos that they've been nominated for, we were up against them at the same time. So we've been having this joke rivalry with them ever since the first one. And since we won the first time, we're up on them. So every time it happens, we start shit on the internet with them. Actually, I think Vil is usually the one who starts shit with us, but it's always entertaining.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think they mind. I think that they're quite happy
No.
that you've taken it home. So that's pretty cool. I got off topic a little bit there. I would like to talk a little bit. So you started a management company. It's called is it called MKM?
Yeah, MKM Management Services.
So that's your day job now. That's your full-time gig.
Yeah, and it's nice getting to hang out with my brother every day, and I listen to whatever music I want, and we just piddle away at numbers.
So obviously, you're making a living at it. You've got enough clients. You're making a living at it. You guys are able to sort of pay your bills and continue to make music, and everything's good.
Yeah, on paper, shy of the constant battle that goes on in your brain, I really have nothing to complain about right now. In terms of how I approached school and my hopes for the future, I kind of was playing a long game with everything, where I got a business degree ultimately to work in the music industry because I felt that was the only thing I really cared about, and the only way I'd ever be able to make money in this world was by doing something with business, because I knew the music I was playing was never going to make me money. And the fact that almost 20 years later, now here I am making a living doing the boring shit in the music industry while still getting to play music is pretty much as good as it gets, I think.
It's interesting that you say that. I've talked to some people in the past who really, they got into music to make the music, and that's what they wanted to do. But when the business end kind of hit them, they were like, oh, I hate this industry. I got to get out. And you're sort of saying that you saw an end game where you could continue to make music, but it was the business aspect of it that would keep you employed.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people who get into the music business through music typically get into the more relationshipy, schmoozy side, which is undoubtedly absolutely horrific. The music industry is horrible. It's very poorly run, and a large part of that is because so many of the people that run things in it have no formal business training or experience. So it's a clusterfuck. And in that's where people like Shane and myself have market potential, because we actually do know what we're doing and can keep things organized properly. It's been cool getting to kind of give back to the community to a certain extent as well, while obviously getting paid and being able to make a living. But yeah, it's wild. I understand why so many people do dislike it, but for me, just being able to be employed and be my own boss and get to deal with bands, generally speaking, like I don't hate any of my clients. The fact that I work with some of the people that I do is always a trip. Like bands that I've grown up listening to, we work with now. Like that's fucking cool. Even if doing their bookkeeping sucks, it's still cool. Like doing bookkeeping sucks regardless. The fact that you can do it for one of your favorite bands is pretty okay.
Can you do any name dropping? Who are your favorite bands that you get to work for? Hey gang, you feeling sluggish? Trying to find some energy for the gym, or wishing you could shed a few pounds and are struggling to find just the thing to help you? Then check out High on Life Superfoods. High on Life is the leading provider of hemp-based, nutrient-rich supplements intended to instill optimal health to those who wish to perform at the next level. Listen, I'm not just talking here. I use High on Life products myself. LIT is an amazing hemp-based, vegan, raw food blend that helps reset your body's nutrient balance and kickstarts your metabolism to get you going through the day. Use it as a shake, in a smoothie, or try my favorite. Mix it up with some cold coconut milk and cocoa, and voila, LIT ice cream. Do your body a favor, everyone. Go to highonlifesuperfoods.com and enter the code ForceFed10 on checkout to receive 10% off your order. But don't just listen to me. High on Life is used by some of your favorite bands: Suffocation, Trivium, Dark Angel, Testament, Body Count, and many more. These guys know what it means to need to keep up their metal pace. Try it and you will see the difference. I have. highonlifesuperfoods.com. Get it.
I mean, a couple, like, we work with Propagandy here in Winnipeg, and I've done some stuff with Gorguts, which, like, the fact that I get to talk with Luke LeMay it's so cool, because, like, I went and saw him in Minneapolis when I was, like, 19.
Cool.
I don't know. That's the shit for me.
No, that's pretty cool. I had the privilege of talking to him once a long time ago, and he was and Gorguts was, they were top notch in terms of what was happening in death metal at the time, and he was definitely good to talk to. I enjoyed that, so that's cool. That is cool.
And they still are top notch, which is the wild part. The fact that they were so far ahead of everyone in the '90s, and then when they came back, like, he's still so far ahead of everyone. It's a really cool story too, because like they went from being super super obscure, and then everyone else catching up. And then they sold more records with their latest ones than they did their entire back catalog, which is fucking crazy because nobody buys records anymore.
Well, that's sort of, I think that speaks a little bit to, you hear an awful lot about people who were in the music industry in the 80s and 90s, and often you'll hear people complain about, and I might have this wrong, but I want to talk about it anyway. You complain about how the internet has really killed the ability of musicians to make money. I've even heard some folks say that I got out of music when the internet stole my income. I understand that the illegal downloading and things like that can really hurt people, but I think my personal perspective is that it's really forced those musicians who really just want to make music into that almost do-it-yourself category, where if you're a fan, you buy the record. And I mean, vinyl's huge again, and so that's wonderful. If you're a fan, you buy the t-shirt. If you're a fan, you buy the record. And I think that the industry has turned some of these bands that maybe didn't do as well as you thought they did when you thought they should have, into a band that you got to have their next record. And I kind of think that's the one benefit of the whole internet, pillaging of the record industry has done, is it's provided this. It's really brought it back to the basics of, like, between the band and the fan, and it's really cut out a lot of the big industry.
Yeah, it can. The way it definitely reshaped everything. I don't know if I'd say for the better, but it definitely you can get away with doing it yourself far easier than ever before, which is great. But the way the monetization of the actual, like, intellectual property of music it's totally fucked now, where at least places like Spotify and Apple Music have normalized paying for music again to a degree, but the model is completely fucked up from where it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
As a music listener, it's probably a better time than ever because quality of content and the sheer volume of content out there is easier to get a hold of than ever. And it's great. Like, I myself use Spotify with a degree of guilt, even though we're not really making any money off of our things. Yeah, it's a weird one. As an artist, it does suck because you don't see any money from your record.
Even unless you're selling the hard copy, right? Unless you're selling the actual, or is the price of vinyl so much that you just can't really?
It is a lot. Like for me, like even to order stuff that I want from the U.S., it's going to cost $50 an LP.
Yeah.
Which you really got to want an LP if it's going to cost $50.
The way I do it is I listen to stuff online, and then I have a list of albums to buy, and I add to that, right? So I'll listen to stuff online, and if I find something that I'm like, I got to have that, it goes on my list. And then once a month, I let myself buy 1 or 2 records, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
Got to maintain a budget, but I work my way through that list, and you know, it's gotten to the point that I'm buying records now that I should have bought when they came out a year ago, but this is where I'm at. So
yeah, and that's the way you got to do it now. If you value the physical product and supporting bands in such a way. But yeah, there's a degree of nostalgia where I miss the days of being able to go down to a store and pick up a couple CDs a week. That it was cool. There was a thrill to it, and there was just more money moving around. But yeah. I guess that's why everyone tours now, because that's the only way to actually get money.
Tours, T-shirts, because you don't really make money from the actual show, do you?
Not a lot, but some.
So it's mostly your merch.
Yeah, it's usually, depending on the group, a lot of the time it's about 50-50. You make half from the door, half from merch. And even then with the merch, like, there's margins. It depends on how well you've set up your distribution network on that, where, like, if you can get some of the better ones we've seen, bands are making 75% margins on the merch they sell, which is really quite good. If you can set up something like that, then you're not doing too bad. But again, all depends on the volume you're selling.
We talked about your Juno nominations. So I thought 3, but you've had 4. I'm glad I missed one. And you've got, I think, 8 albums in the can you've put out over your 20-year history.
Yeah, I think, well, technically 7, and then we have like an EP that we tacked on a bunch of demos for the digital version of it. Mm-hmm. So on like Spotify, it comes out as an actual album, but it really isn't.
Oh, I see. Okay. Did your Juno nominations impact, I know that the Junos aren't a big deal anywhere but in Canada, and even in Canada it depends on the year. Did being nominated 4 times impact your presence, or impact your sort of the amount that people know about you in Canada?
I don't know. Some people, maybe. I know winning one definitely did, especially at the time. Like, we were the smallest band on the bill for that Juno lineup, and a lot of the time we still are, which is funny. We're by no means a small band, but like for this year, all the other nominees were more popular than us. Every little piece helps, though. I mean, it was funny. We saw some. It was a weird sponsored content thing that CPA magazine did on us, because we'd been a part of an article about CPAs playing music, and obviously, like, we're a weird oddball one that can be a decent marketing thing, because we're not what you'd expect accountants to be. And it was moving around on Facebook, and someone was taking issue with the fact that they were covering us and were saying you should be covering these other metal bands, and it was such a ridiculous thing. Like, I've never heard of this band. It's like, if you're, and the premise of it was, this person was saying, I'm one of the biggest metalheads you'd ever meet, and I've never heard of this band. It's like, if you haven't heard of our band at this point in, especially Canada, and this isn't like me being egotistical, like, are you really paying attention to what's going on in the metal scene in Canada? Like, we don't have delusions of grandeur, but if you haven't heard our fucking name by now, like, you've got to be kidding me. Pay attention.
Well, I would go so far as to say, if you're somebody who's out there and you're about to send a message or an email that says, you know, you shouldn't be promoting these guys, I've been a metalhead for years and I don't know who the fuck these guys are, maybe you're the problem. Maybe you should look into them.
Yeah. The person probably wouldn't give a shit about us, but still, like, playing the I've never heard of this card, like, come on, man. You're only making yourself look stupid at this point.
I would say so. It's like,
I mean,
you're in the age of the internet. Google it. Figure it out.
Yeah, we could be a joke to them, too, and I don't care. it's not for you then. But like, if you haven't come across the name, come on.
I would agree with
if
that.
that's your burn, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. You've got some dates coming up.
We've got a string of dates in May that's taking us out to the West Coast and back. And then we're probably going to try and plan a trip to get down to Texas and back sometime later this year. And then I'm trying to figure out what's next after that. It's a slow rollout for this record because we can't just tour all the time anymore. But we're still trying to hit a bunch of the places that we haven't hit yet. Whether or not we can make everywhere possible is unlikely, but we're going to keep trying to roll this out.
Where would you say Ken Mode has their biggest market?
Probably East Coast, Northeast, places like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Montreal, Toronto, and some of the Midwest. Chicago and Minneapolis have always been really, really good to us.
Any international spots?
Yeah, and we hit those, London and Paris and Belgium, Brussels specifically. We haven't been able to make it up to Sweden in quite a while, so I wouldn't mind trying to get up there at some point for this record cycle. We're one of those bands at this point where, like, the classic big cities in the West are where you'd expect we'd have a scene. Those are the ones that are generally our best cities. So at least we're not like just some local band from Winnipeg here. We're at least the cities you'd expect that should like us. Generally, we have followings there.
Mm-hmm. So you're still based in Winnipeg, and you have no plans to move or anything like that. You're just like
that. We are.
Boys.
It's cheaper to live here than most places in Canada. Our friends and family are here, and there's nothing really restricting us. I have no plans to leave.
Tell people where they can find you on the internet.
ken-mode.com. That links you up to almost everything. We've got, obviously, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that shite. Most of those, I think, are Ken Mode Noise, and Facebook is just Ken Mode. Yeah, if you go to ken-mode.com, that we keep that pretty up to date, so it links to everything.
Thought Loved was a fantastic album.
Thank you very much, sir.
Definitely know why you were nominated, and I appreciate it. And I mean, it's been a long time since I saw you guys play, so I'm hoping I can make my way over to Vancouver for your show at the Modified Ghost Festival, but I'm a bit of a ways
hopefully
away,
you can.
So.
That'll be a wild show.
Yeah, for sure. And Jesse, I really appreciate your time. I thank you for taking the call, and good luck on your tour and with the rest of the album cycle.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure.
Well, there you have it, folks. That was episode 7 of Hard Rubens Force Fed Cafe with Jesse Matthewson. Thanks very much for joining us here today. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to check us out on iTunes or Stitcher, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and leave a review and spread the word. See you next time.